Now, a councillor in Morrisshire has said it's time to recognise that anti-English sentiment in parts of Scotland must be called out for what it is: anglophobia. Is that right? Is there growing anti-English bigotry north of the border, or is it just what it's always been, to some degree, simply banter? Sometimes quite hard-nosed banter. Well, I'm joined by the historian and commentator and my GBNews colleague, Neil Oliver, to reflect on this. Neil, the obvious answer, I suppose, is to say it can be a bit of both.
Yes, I think that's right. When I was growing up, decades ago now, there was a lot of banter, I suppose you would say, especially around international sporting events. Football and rugby in particular, would also always bring that out. There would always be a bit of anti-Englishness going on in that context. But it was kind of like, it was 90-minute nationalism, I suppose. What's there now, though, after all these years of SNP dominance in Holyrood? Yes, there is anglophobia, without a doubt, but the SNP and their supporters are phobic, frankly, about anyone who doesn't support them or voices opposition to them and their policies. Their special loathing, I would say, stronger than any anglophobia, is reserved for Scots like me who don't vote for them or for independence. For the SNP, it's all about support for them and for their call for independence. If you're English and you loudly support both, you might well get a free pass from the SNP and their supporters. If you're English and you're pro-UK and you vote for another party, then you'll have the same treatment meted out to you as gets meted out to anybody else that doesn't share the narrow nationalist worldview of the SNP.
Neil, you say you're in that special circle of hell that the SNP have reserved for you. I mean, I can't put that to them, obviously, but I'd suggest to you there might be another circle of hell. I've heard it said, you've heard it said, many of our viewers and listeners will have heard it said, I'm sure, that there is now a kind of spoken word purity test. I was interviewing earlier this week a chap called Jamie Blackett, who sounds English, but he's got a Scottish heritage as long as yours, if not longer, I imagine. And he says now something's changed, that he opens his mouth and he's judged in a way that's different to how it once was.
Yes, it's all symptomatic of the increasingly bitter, poisoned, toxic, febrile atmosphere that is politics in Scotland. It's very polarised. You're either in the independence camp or you're not. It's tribal. It's very strong. Yes, my dad-in-law is English born. But his dad was a Scottish miner, worked in central Scotland. But at the time when my dad-in-law was born, the family were in Kent, working in the coal mines there. But my dad-in-law, John, and his brother, Billy, have been in Scotland for half a century. And they've both experienced anglophobia over the years, and I know that has been more noticeable for them in more recent years under during the SNP reign from Holyrood. Without a doubt, everyone who isn't loudly in support of the SNP and independence is increasingly liable to be under attack, metaphorically speaking, from the extremist wing of the SNP support, without a doubt. I mean, I've lost count. I don't even bother to count now how many English, friends of mine have been on the receiving end of that kind of, get lost and get back down to England where you belong sort of rhetoric. And this is directed at people who've by now lived most of their lives living and working in Scotland.
Do you think it varies from area to area? Is it worse in the central belt? Is it worse in Glasgow than it is in Perthshire, for instance?
I don't know. I mean, I have to stress, I've said this many times, I'm strongly of the opinion that the majority of Scottish people are not for independence, and they are not pro-SNP. The 2014 referendum, although the figure was 52-48 in favour of maintaining the union, of 32 local authorities in Scotland, 28 voted to remain part of the United Kingdom, which gives you a better sense of the strength of feeling that is for the United Kingdom and Scotland. And the vast majority of Scots are what they have always been, which is to say just decent, friendly, welcoming people. In the same way that, I mean, I've been all over the UK. I've worked in all parts. I've worked in Northern Ireland, in Wales and in England, as well as in Scotland. I've always been made welcome in all of those places. And that friendly sense of a United Kingdom, of one Britain, I've always been an advocate for, and I've always been on the receiving end of it. And I think that it's important that people don't go away thinking that Scotland is only about that side that is represented by some of the SNP support, because that is a minority. The majority of Scots are what they have always been, which is friendly, decent folk, welcoming of outsiders, which is exactly the same as I have always. That's not a sense of national exceptionalism. I've always experienced that in England and in the rest of the UK.
And I think that, you know, whether it's the 800,000 people of Scots heritage who live in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, or people who are in Scotland, there's still a great number, you and me included, who still, perhaps first and foremost, see themselves as British first, actually. Neil, Lynn May's alongside me today in the studio for the next hour and a half or so. She's got a question for you.
Hi, Neil.
Okay.
I just wanted to know, what does anglophobia actually look like? How is it manifested? Because I know this councillor said, you know, that it's worse than Islamophobia. But when we look at Islamophobia, we can see that there's tangible things that happen. You know, ignorance so far as thinking everyone that's a Muslim is a terrorist, or things like that. How is this manifested?
Yeah. I mean, I'm always wary about the phobia bit. You know, I mean, for me, a phobia is a very specific reaction to something, to a stimulus. I think anglophobia is largely where it's directed at English people. It's usually about you. The undertone is usually that you don't belong here, that you are part of that imperialist colonising force that, you know, in the imagination of the hardline SNP support, those that are descended from the occupying English force, as they understand it, from hundreds of years ago. In answer to your question, I think in its simplest terms, it manifests as people being told they don't belong here and that they should go back to where they belong. I think that is largely how it's seen. You get it's become, I suppose, during the time of the SNP, they've become wily to being heard not wanting English people. And so some proxies have come into the discourse. So you'll hear a lot of, they'll talk about the Westminster parties or the London parties. And that's Westminster and the London parties is a proxy term for England. Westminster parties, the London parties, are anybody who isn't the SNP. You know, so you'll hear a lot of the antagonism and the aggression directed in that way, because the SNP have learned that it's probably not good PR to be heard to be being anti-English. But having said that, you still see it during the time of the height of the paranoia around COVID. You know, there were people in hazmat suits. Well, you know, they're kind of like fancy dress, really, but they were dressed up and saying that the English shouldn't come into Scotland and infect the Scottish people with their English COVID. You know, so that it's you are not welcome, you don't belong, and it's particularly hurtful because for so many people with English accents or of English families, people who've been living here their whole lives. You know, they moved up as children, or they've always been connected here, or they're from families that are, you know, like my in-laws, as I say, my mum-in-law is Scottish, my dad-in-law is English, and you know, and people have found themselves in a cleft stick. But it's go back where you belong.
Neil, it's sensitive territory, and you've guided us through it with typical dexterity, and I thank you for it. Neil Oliver there.